are live right now on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. So thank you everyone for being here. Excited for today's show. So as we're getting settled and people are sort of joining the live stream here, Emma, I'll do a more formal introduction here in just a second. But I have to ask you, I know you're in Madison, Wisconsin, here in the U.S. I know Madison is not the same as Milwaukee, but are you a Milwaukee Bucks fan, or is that a thing in Madison?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I think my family isn't quite as like gung-ho on all of our sports teams as most Wisconsinites are. I feel like Badgers, Packers, Bucks, and Brewers are pretty sacred in most households. We're a little bit more on the college sports realm in our house. So we're kind of diehard Badger fans. But this is exciting. The Bucks haven't really been that exciting to watch in years past. So I think it's a nice little breath of fresh air for everybody in Wisconsin right now, and something to, especially with things opening back up again, people being able to go. They just did a brand new, beautiful facility that I don't think most people got to experience before we hit the world of COVID. So I think that's been really nice for people that are in the Milwaukee area. And I know a couple of people from Madison making the drive to go watch in person. So that's exciting.
Yeah, very cool. Well, so a lot of our audience is not in the United States. It may not be NBA or basketball fans, but for those of you that don't know, and the NBA finals are happening right now, and the Milwaukee Bucks are one of the two teams left standing that are fighting for the championship right now. It's tied 2-2. So this was a perfect time to have you on the show.
Yeah, I feel now I feel like I should have had a better answer of like, yes, I will be watching the game. We've got plans tomorrow when the game is going on that we'll be watching, but I have a feeling we might be slightly distracted by the children running around and screaming past bedtime at the same time.
Yes. I know how it is having young kids for sure. Well, good. Well, thanks for being here. And thanks for everyone for joining today. This is like I said, our Friday live stream. We actually incorporate this live session into our Transformation Ground Control podcast recordings that we release every Wednesday. So you're getting to see how the sausage is made, so to speak, by being part of the live interview. And I encourage everyone to ask questions as we go here today. And before I queue up the topic and then introduce Emma more formally, it would help if, for those of you watching right now, just drop a line, if you don't mind, in the comments of where you're joining from today. What part of the world are you in? If you want to tell us your title or what you do, are you a consultant, are you CIO, or are you on a transformation team? Just tell us who you are and where you're from. I'd love to see what the audience is up to and where people are joining from today. And so today's topic that we want to cover is, we wanted to cover this topic, which I find fascinating. I know you do too, Emma. We've had conversations about this in the past. I was on your podcast recently talking about something similar, which is this whole concept of how do you fill the gaps of enterprise technology? A lot of times people think myopically about ERP systems or some off-the-shelf solution that's going to solve all the world's problems. But as we'll talk about today, the realities are there's a lot of gaps, a lot of risks, a lot of things that can be addressed through other alternate sorts of technologies. So the topic is really beyond ERP. What else is there out there in terms of emerging technologies and different types of technologies that can be used to automate your business and make your business more effective? So that's really the topic we want to cover today. Of course, that's a very broad topic. It could go a million different directions. We'll see what ground we can cover here in the hour we have together. So I guess with that being said, Emma, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited. It's fun for me to be on the other side of the interview every once in a while and have the opportunity to keep myself on my toes to answer the questions as opposed to always asking them. So
right, exactly. So just to start, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you, I guess just to start, and then I'll ask you in a second about Naviance and what Naviance does, but just maybe tell us about yourself. How'd you end up in this world, and what do you do now in this digital transformation world?
So I'd like to pretend that I had this like master plan to get into the world of digital transformation starting at like age 5, because that'd be a fun story to tell. But I don't know if there are 5-year-olds that are out there dreaming about that. But I originally went to school to be a middle school and high school teacher. And so that was kind of, even starting when I was 5, I was always the one that played teacher and, of course, told my friends what to do in that avenue. And then all through middle school and high school, the subject changed, but it always seemed that I wanted to be a teacher. And then on the tail end of my student teaching and kind of going through that process, before I even had time to apply to a job in a traditional teaching environment, I was offered a position in corporate training. And I did that for a couple of years and realized like, hey, this business thing is interesting to me. And I had never really even entertained that idea in the past. And so when I started kind of looking at what that next adventure would be, I kind of found Naviance, the organization that I work with, more by culture and less about what they actually physically did to help businesses. My husband's office physical location is across the street from our physical location here at Naviance, and he had worked on a project with a couple of my coworkers and said, hey, why don't you go check it out? And so kudos to Naviance for giving me the opportunity to come in and learn about our industry, because when I had my first interview, I didn't really know a lot about it. I just had my experience from previous positions, understanding what inefficient processes looked like and how frustrating it could be in the position of having to do those inefficient processes day in and day out. And I mean, part of my internship was doing things like unclogging printers and or walking things physically around an office for approvals and the types of stuff that hopefully we'll be able to automate and not have interns relive again anytime in the future. And so I really kind of stumbled upon the industry, but the more that I got involved in it and the more that I saw the impact that our projects at Naviance were having on our customers and the cost savings that our customers were getting, I started to get pretty passionate about it. And over the last year and a half have really found like my true passion of educating and kind of taking that teacher persona and putting that hat on in the world of digital transformation. Because even though you and I and people in this industry talk about it all day, every day, it's easy to think that everyone understands this. But I've realized there's a pretty big gap in between people that aren't living and breathing in this industry, understanding what it is and what it could do for them, and us over here on our side. And so I've really been working to kind of take that teacher hat and help bridge that gap for people. And that's really the part that I've found has been super exciting and a lot of fun for me over the last year and a half.
Yeah, that's a super cool background and a non-traditional background to get to digital transformation. But as we talk about some of these topics today, I think, we'll find that that's a very helpful background. I mean, I think having that human and the education-based background is something that's sorely missing and lacking in the digital transformation space. So that's something we'll get more into here later. And speaking of that, by the way, I found you, the way you and I connected was on TikTok, because you had posted a video about change management. And so that caught my eye, and I thought, okay, we're thinking the same way here. And I think we engaged a little bit on TikTok, and then, here we are on each other's podcast. So thanks for being here. So tell us about Naviance. What does Naviance do?
Yeah, so Naviance, and this is going back to the idea of broad statements, this might be a little broad, but I can start giving kind of, as we go through our conversation today, a bit more context surrounding it. But we are a process-minded consulting organization, and we are resellers and implementers of a number of technical solutions that are really focused on content and processes within the organization. So anybody like joining us today, thinking about your position, when I say content, I mean everything from your written emails that are coming in to potentially voicemails that need to be a part of, a claim in the insurance industry, or documents that you're pulling down from other websites, or forms that your customers are filling out to start and kind of initiate a relationship with you. So we interact with all different kinds of content all day long. And sometimes organizations don't have a great way of organizing that and making it accessible for their employees while they're trying to get their job done. And so one of the major things that we do is look at how do we provide access to information and content in a way that enables automation and drives process efficiency within the organization. So typically our engagements are a mix of that consulting, where we're really looking at what problems are we trying to solve, how are you doing things today, maybe using some data along with our consultants' background to help understand where are opportunities to improve your efficiency and your process. And then because we have a couple of different tools that we use in the background, we have the ability to kind of think through what are your business drivers, what are the outcomes that we're trying to help drive for you. And then we will pull from that toolkit of these different solutions to bring forward the right tools to solve those problems.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit more because you just hit on a couple things that are weaknesses or the Achilles heels of traditional ERP systems, and that's really the crux of what we want to talk about today. So, I guess to start, I know one of the things that when I looked at your background and as we've talked, I know RPA, robotic process automation, is one area that you guys focus on. And what I want to do today, there's a series of questions I have here to start that you kind of dive into some of these emerging technologies and pieces of technologies that don't necessarily get addressed by ERP or enterprise-wide technologies. And one of them is RPA. So maybe help us understand what RPA is, what's an example of where it might be used.
Yeah. So RPA stands for robotic process automation. And just like it says, it is bringing in not a physical, but a software robot to help you manage repetitive processes within your organization. And so that's kind of at its most pure definition. But then we also, and this is where we get into the land of ambiguity, there are tools, and sometimes as you start to kind of do some investigation in how RPA works and kind of where it kind of blends with some of the other terms, there are times where there will be artificial intelligence or machine learning that are also working alongside with that software robot to be able to execute tasks that might go above and beyond just repetitive. Mm-hmm. But when we take a look at use cases for things for RPA and how it can help organizations, it's really looking at where do you have tasks that are completed, and sometimes for large organizations, things are completed thousands of times a day. Or when you're looking at, taking information from one system and entering it into another system. Or places where you maybe would desire to have something like API integration so that your solutions can fit together much more seamlessly, but it's an application that you don't have control out of because it's a third-party application, or you'd like that integration to be with a website, and you don't have the ability to build the same type of integration you would if you had ownership of all of those platforms. RPA gives us the ability to have your little robot assistant go and execute those tasks on your behalf so that your people can focus on the more innately human parts of their job rather than focusing on those really mundane or repetitive tasks that are done repeatedly throughout their day. And so sometimes that RPA can be done in like an unattended fashion is what we call it. And that's where we would look at like really large batch processes that are happening hundreds or thousands or, hundreds of thousands of times in a day. Or we have some attended automation that allows your physical human workers to interact with that RPA bot to execute tasks in tandem to speed up their work on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of variability of how it can be used depending on the specific process and the other tools that are kind of making up your capability collection. But ultimately, the best way to kind of look at where you would want to use RPA is automating highly repetitive tasks so that you can just take that portion out of your day.
So something like processing purchase orders or I'm just trying to think of other examples, but POs, that's one that seems like there's a high volume of purchase orders or that sort of thing that people
So one of the examples that I like to use when we're talking about for example, in a claims scenario, when we're looking at adjudicating a claim and you've got a collection of information and you have to gather information from different websites and or download a police report, or you have to bring everything together into one place. One of the things that we can do is have your RPA bot go out and collect some of that information that you may need to make that decision. So go download a report on your behalf and bring it into your system of records so that you have access to it. Or and there's, the scenario where maybe you have a process that leads to having to open a ticket on an external website as kind of the last stage of your process. You can gather all of the information and do all of the processing that needs critical thought, and then have your RPA bot grab all of the data that you've collected and go out to that third-party website and enter that data and open that ticket for you. So, in that scenario, we're not talking about saving you hours a day. That might be, 2 to 3 minutes to open that ticket. But if you're doing that 100 times a day, all of a sudden that starts to add up pretty significantly for you. So it's one of the ways that I kind of use to conceptualize how this works is a lot of times it's, if you can show a robot or that bot that you're working with how you are executing that task, and by clicking around on your screen, and it can see the work that you're doing and where you're gathering information and where you're putting it, it will be able to execute that task for you. Now, is there always a return on investment to have that bot do that work for you if there's not a high enough volume of it? No, probably not. But that's where, again, when we get to those really repetitive tasks that we can map very easily, and we can essentially train that bot to what you're doing on your screen from day to day, then it will be able to execute that task on your behalf.
Gotcha. Now, is this custom software, or is this sort of off-the-shelf software that you can deploy in different process settings or different environments?
So they're all, I would say all of the solutions that I'm aware of are pretty configurable in nature. So there are probably, custom RPA bots that have been developed by people, but everyone from Microsoft to some of the big names within RPA like UiPath, Cryon, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism. Those are the large names within this space, and there are many, many more, including open source tools like Robocop or Robobot, and there's tons and tons of tools that you can choose from, and most of them are going to be kind of that low code configuration environment. So you have to understand how to interact with the tool. You have to understand the process behind it and how to configure the tool to do what you're looking for, but you're typically not building it from scratch as you're going into it, and it's really more mapping it to do what the business process requires at that point.
Gotcha. So I had, you and I exchanged notes on the questions I was going to ask you, and I'm already going to blow the script now because I can't help but ask, even though I was going to wait until later to ask about change management, I have to do it now. Yeah. So when you have a situation where you automate someone's job, and I'm a AP clerk and I'm processing, processing purchase orders and paying, setting up payments and whatnot. And so you're going to automate my job with this the Robocop, as you called it the first time. I noticed the Robocop.
Yeah, before I said it wrong.
The Robobot or whatever the software is.
I told you there was going to be a time or two while we were having this conversation that I misspoke. So go ahead. Sorry.
That's why we do it live, because it's not editable now. It's on.
Yeah. Everyone knows I make up words. Anyhow, continue.
But so when you automate someone's job, how do you manage that change? I mean, because that's a pretty significant change to come in and say, we're going to have a robot or RPA automate what you might be spending, 50, 60% of your time doing. What have you seen work, or what have you seen some of the challenges be from a change management or human perspective of that?
So I think the biggest, and I don't want to say this is a misconception, because it is a change and you do have to manage that change. But I think what typically happens, and what I've seen with our customers, is more often than not, they are welcoming of that portion of their job being taken, because it's not that they don't have enough other things to be doing. It's that the other things don't get the attention that they should be, or they don't have the capacity to ever take a deep breath. And what I mean by that is, there's been organizations that we go in to help, specifically in this accounts payable scenario that you mentioned, that we're going in with, whether it's RPA or some of the other tools that we can get into that we've got that kind of help eliminate some of this manual work. And we go in and we help them automate portions of that process to eliminate the manual keying that they need to do, And it opens up time for them to suddenly be paying their bills on time as an organization. Because in the past, they've had a 3-month backlog of processing that they're trying to get through, and they can't hire and train people quick enough, or they don't have the budget to have those people there. And so most of the time when we come in, unless it's a very, very, very large organization that has a lot of people only ever touching these repetitive tasks, do we get into the place where we're displacing people's positions? We're really just refocusing their time to focus on what are the really impactful parts of their job that drive the business forward. And usually, once you kind of put it in that frame of mind, they're welcoming of that change because they don't want to be doing that part of their job anyhow. And so and again, I do not want to mislead that there isn't, some positions that might be eliminated because of intelligent automation and some of the tools that we're going to talk about today. But more often than not, the organizations are raring and ready to go to take that person and train them to do something different if their whole position was something that's being eliminated, or they're shifting their focus onto that higher value task. But you have to have the conversation honestly on the front end for them to get to the point where they understand that and they're not fearful of the change or fighting the change. Because if they think that their job is going to go away, they're not going to help you do it. But if they understand, we're not here to eliminate your job, we're here to make it better. And let's talk about what your ideal better job looks like, and you be a part of this. They will come up with new ideas to manage the process. They'll help bring forward other, bottlenecks within the process that you should be focusing on as well. And it'll be just so much more collaborative throughout the entire process.
Yeah. So getting their engagement and buy-in early on rather than defining the change and forcing the change on them is sort of the
and one of the things I mentioned that, from our perspective, our methodology, we have typically a blended approach of bringing in a process consultant and or using data to help us hone in on where those opportunities are for improvement. But I think that process consultant, and even, whether it's someone internally or a third party, but somebody being there to help you have those conversations and ask questions in the right way and frame things in the right way and not forget about the people is such a critical part of that. Because, as you get into conversations about change, it's a scary thing for people. And we're both human-centric change people. And when you can help them feel even incrementally more comfortable with it and help them feel ownership of it, one of the main things that we do is a discovery process where our team is working alongside with our customers' team to design what that future state looks like. And when it's somebody from the outside asking questions of why do you do it that way, or is there a different way to do this, it's less threatening to answer those questions, and you don't get the same defensive nature that you do if you're managing it internally. And I don't know if you guys have had that experience, but sometimes that friendly third party asking the question is a lot more well received than somebody, even if they have good intentions within your organization.
Yeah, you're not caught up. People know that you're not caught up in the politics, the internal dynamics, and you're not jockeying as an outside party. You're not jockeying for any sort of. There's no ulterior motive to suggest something like that, but it could be perceived that way if it's someone internally suggesting, hey, Emma, what do you do all day? Do you really need to be doing that? Maybe we should just automate your job. That's going to be a lot more threatening if I say it to you as a coworker versus a consultant comes in and maybe more tactfully asks the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, and it's interesting to hear you say that because we see a lot of organizations that don't even think about what are we going to do with that time that we save. And that is something I think from an org design perspective you have to do is say, okay, if I'm saving 30 or 40% of Emma's time and she doesn't have to process POs anymore, what is she going to do? What's her focus? How does she reprioritize her work? In the unfortunate event that her job is going to go away, what does that look like? What do you do with Emma? And just having those answers is important. And companies don't think about that a lot of times because they're so focused on the technology. How do we get this technology to work and how do we define the process? But they don't always think about what does that impact to the organization.
Yeah. And again, we've had some, and I would say more early adoption of digital transformation when there used to be mail rooms with, 20 people that were working in these large organizations. That was when I think we saw a little bit more of like, okay, so what does our training path look like for these people, or where else in the organization can we find a spot? And it was a little bit more purposeful. I would say it's been a while since there hasn't been enough work to keep people busy after we've automated portions of their job. That like, it isn't like we just, more they've brought in automation because they have a capacity issue or they are growing so rapidly and they would rather not have to hire at the clip that's required to support that growth. And so then they're able to keep the same size team, but the company growth would have outpaced the size of their team had they not automated the process.
Right.
I've got one customer who I think, if I'm going to say this correctly, they have a process that they put in place probably 10 years ago. And so they were early adopters of technology and using it to manage processes. But over the course of that time frame, they have offset an additional headcount of 130 people from how they were doing the process to what they're doing today, and incremental improvements to that process over time has allowed them. So it's not a hard ROI because they didn't hire those 130 people, but based off of their projections, they were able to offset that much additional headcount.
Yeah. It seems like in more recent years, companies are a lot more lean. They don't have a lot of fat to trim. In terms of people. I know in the 90s when I started my career, there was a lot more. It felt like there was a lot more trimming that still had to happen in terms of headcount and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So, keeping in this initial theme of sort of alternate emerging technologies that not everyone is fully aware of yet. You mentioned the word intelligent automation a second ago. Tell us that. What is intelligent automation? How does it apply to an organization?
Yeah, so I dropped that. And one of my big pet peeves is within our industry. I mean, at least an ERP has been an ERP for a while now. In our industry, it seems like every 2 years or so, we like to throw another term at everybody just to confuse them. And so intelligent automation, I don't want to say is a completely separate idea from something like RPA. But really, when we take a look at intelligent automation, is we're looking at tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, these more kind of advanced they're still emerging because they're not kind of at the point where we think of AI as these, all-knowing, I think it was Will Smith in the iRobot movie.
Yeah, it was.
When we think of artificial intelligence, we think of like these all-knowing, like crazy smart robots that are going to take over the world. We're not to that point yet. So if that's our goal, we're still emerging. But it's bringing in those human-like thought patterns. And, AI in itself has so many different layers of then kind of subsequent technologies that build up to that larger category. But it's taking that kind of human mimicked intelligence and bringing it into these automation tools that have been around for a while. So things like RPA being combined with those tools would then become intelligent and kind of that intelligent automation space. Another kind of category within this, and I mentioned that this kind of falls into our capabilities as well. There's a technology called OCR, which I'm sure being in the ERP world, you're familiar with OCR, but that's optical character recognition. In the past, that technology has been around for many, many years, far before I got into the industry. It was very template based, and it was very much being able to look at a specific portion of a document based on coordinates or based on a actual template that you built out in your tool to go to this spot and capture the characters that were at that spot within the document. Now we're able to do things like intelligent document processing, where we have AI and machine learning as a part of these solutions. So rather than having to build out templates, the tools can kind of look at the document the same way that a human would, and use context on the document and use things like natural language processing to know that the pound sign or the hashtag or whatever we want to call it also means number. And it knows that that means number, and it knows that we may, through that natural language processing, we may abbreviate the word number down to NUM. And so when it sees, invoice, it sees invoice, and it has the invoice number, and it's an abbreviation, or it's a pound sign, or however that vendor presents that information to you. The tool is intelligent enough now to understand that that's what that means, understand the context of that, and then know that it should look above that, it should look below that, it should look next to it. And then it's going to determine, oh, okay, that's the invoice number. I'm going to grab that value, and I'm going to pull that out as an index value. And that typically has had to be either a manual process, or we had to build out those manual templates to be able to get us to that point. Now these tools, are so well trained and so well versed in what an invoice looks like. You can have all sorts of variability still with very high confidence coming through because of that intelligent aspect being added into the tools. And what we're starting to see much more is now that intelligence being built into all sorts of technology that allows us to kind of move into that intelligent automation space beyond just capture or beyond robotic process automation to things like business process management or BPM tools, now starting to have intelligence infused in them. So it can start to do some routing with a little bit more logic and a little bit more thought process and intelligence behind it, instead of all just yes or no, right or wrong, kind of logic that we've used in the past, and starting to minimize the amount of human intervention that you need in these processes when things follow your standard process.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and I can see a lot of uses for that. I mean, there's so many. You think about the average organization, a big, huge company that does lots of different things, lots of different documents floating around with different nomenclature, and even just that one example of invoice number. Think of all the alternate scenarios where that would help. Even outside of invoice processing as well.
Well, and some of those, again, with machine learning and that type of thing, I talk about that tool specifically a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science right now, because when it's got machine learning in it, or any of these tools that they get more effective over time too. So as you get more documents running through the process and the engine has more time to learn from these document samples, you will have to intervene and kind of verify through the process less and less as it goes. And so it will know, oh, okay, even though I see this address block and I know this address block is this vendor, and I know this vendor typically puts this information there, and oh, okay, we're processed. We know we can, with confidence, that we've got it. And it can do things too, like, on the invoice side, I'm going to calculate all the line items and add in the tax and make sure that this, that the number I've captured here matches and is verified based on the math that I've done. And so it can do some of that stuff that we had to rely on people to do even 3 years ago, So there's a lot of advancements being done in all of these kind of automation or process management tools to get to that point where we have less and less intervention needed each step of the way.
Gotcha. Okay. And so we have an audience question I wanted to get to from Karen, who's watching on Crowdcast. And again, if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter and you have questions, feel free to just put them in the chat box on that platform. I'm watching all of them for any questions that come through. But the good news is Karen is not thinking too much differently than you and I as it relates to the human part. So I'm glad it's not just me that couldn't resist asking the change question. But Karen asked, what role changes have you seen when an organization moves to bots? For example, how does this impact customer support?
Yeah, and that's Karen, that idea of customer support. One of the biggest areas that we see RPA being used is in customer support and some of those front-facing roles within an organization, even beyond, let me take a half step back. So number one, when we bring in this type of automation, typically what happens, and we talked about shifting focus and shifting mindset, having the capacity to be empathetic or having the capacity to respond quickly and actually manage customer service is something that is really, when you are months and months behind processing your invoices, and you've got vendors giving you late fees, and you have your boss telling you you need to cut down on your costs and all of these things, and suddenly when your coworker sends you an email to ask you who, like in this scenario, it's your customer, your customer emails you to say, have you gotten this invoice? I had a vendor reach out to me. You're not that concentrated on being super polite in your response to that. You're not that concentrated on getting them a response to answer that question quickly because you have so much work. Once you have that I kind of called it the ability to breathe, and you have the bandwidth in your position to offer that customer support in kind of that setting that we've been talking about, I think it ultimately improves your customer experience, whether those are internal or external customers. Now, taking that half step forward to kind of changing directions of what I was just talking about, there are so many use cases of RPA, specifically within call centers or front-facing customer service scenarios, where think about when you call into a customer service line. And a lot of times they're asking you like, oh, okay, what was your order number? What's your customer number? Or they're looking for some sort of identifying information from you. They're usually asking you to hang tight for a minute while they go and they look for your information. One really good way to use RPA is to have that bot do all of the lookups of all of the information that customer support rep needs to be able to help solve your problem when you're calling. And so that is a super, super common kind of attended scenario that I mentioned earlier, where you're using that bot to bring back information to help you solve a problem. And in scenarios where we've got big call centers or customer service situations, trying to solve the problem on the first call and trying to solve that problem quickly is often a really big KPI for those teams, because that's their goal. They want to help you. They want to help you on the first call. They don't want to have to transfer you to somebody else because they can't solve your problem. And so a big part of that is getting all of the right information in front of them at the time so that they can see what document you got in the mail and actually be able to tell you what it means. They can see exactly where your order is within their process, or help answer any questions that you've got. And even to the point where, as we start getting into some of the intelligent automation space and also just RPA and kind of looking at automation in this arena, it can do things like present customer service reps with reminders to make sure at certain stages of the conversation that they're saying things to you that they are required to say to you, and making sure that they stay compliant, and making sure that they don't have 500 things running in the background of their thought pattern while they're trying to listen to you, so that they can be empathetic. They can truly listen to you because they're not fearful that they're going to forget to do something that they're required by law to tell you. And so being able to just free up that mental space to even have a smile in their voice when they answer the phone helps improve customer service and as the customer, your experience and like overall opinion of that interaction.
Yeah, it's almost like you're using technology to allow people to do less and think more. It's like you're and that's an oversimplification. You're still doing stuff, but you're not doing super manual processes. You're doing higher value processes. It's an opportunity to redesign the purpose of a customer service rep and say, your job is not to go look up stuff. Your job is to be the face of the organization to the customer and to, do all the breathing that you need to do to be successful in that role.
And it's changing conversations about what professional development for some of these types of roles looks like, and what like, to your point, just innately, what is the role of that job? And if you're handling exceptions and you're handling complex, that's a different skill set than handling mundane and repetitive. And as we get to the point where chatbots are coming in, and when I want to understand something and I can type back and forth with someone while I'm at work doing something else, and I don't have to call a customer service rep, I'm not going to make that phone call unless I'm really angry and I need help, or I'm really upset about what's happened and I'm feeling emotional about it. So you need the capacity when you're always taking those exceptions. There we go. When you're always taking those exceptions and always managing these more emotionally charged interactions, you need that support from your technology to make sure that you can actually focus on the conversation that you're having so that you don't take a misstep and hurt your customer brand, just like you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. And then Bala, who's on Crowdcast as well, watching live, he asked the question, which is a great one. Are the bots that you mentioned before, are those capable to do OCR for different languages? So if you have documents in different languages, is it multilingual?
I mean, it depends on what technology you're looking at. The solutions that Naviance has, we have two main intelligent document processing tools that we use, or that intelligent OCR, and both of those do support multiple languages to the tune of probably like 20 or 30. I don't know if either one of them can take every and all language, but I haven't actually run into a scenario with one of my clients where we haven't been able to process what they're looking at. So it's most of the main languages that we would run into with our customers, because both of our software vendors that we work with are international companies. So they're working with people outside the US on a regular basis. I would say that if you're looking at a specific tool, make sure that that's a question that you ask, because there are some that don't have language recognition capabilities across the board. And same with currency recognition. Our tools do support multiple currencies, but sometimes that can throw other tools depending on what level of intelligence or maturity of the tool it is, if they have the capability to do that or not.
Right, right. So I want to shift gears a little bit. There's actually more I wanted to cover on the sort of the technology side, but you and I share so much in common as far as our views of what makes these sorts of transformations successful. So if we kind of step away from specific technologies for a second and just talk about transformation in general, whether it's OCR or bots or intelligent automation or ERP, whatever it is, you're doing something to automate your business and improve your business using technology. What do you see as the most important success factors to make a transformation successful?
Well, so no surprise here, but to me, I think change management is the most important part of a transformation. And the reason that I say that, and I do not want to minimize the importance of having the right tool and making sure that whatever tool you're bringing into your organization at least can support your requirements. Going to a conversation we had earlier today, teaser for everybody, we talked about enterprise versus point solutions. I think that there's something to be said about making strategic decisions with your technology that will allow that technology to grow with your organization over time. So I do not want to minimize that, but ultimately, even if you have the coolest, newest, best, amazing technology around and you implement it and nobody decides to adopt it, it doesn't do the cool, great, amazing things you paid lots of money for it to do. And my colleague, Mark Miller, always says that technology is the easy part and that the people are the hard part. And the more I am in this industry, the more I realize that that's true. You can do all of the right things, but if you don't have the buy-in of the people that are supposed to be driving it, you're not going to get anywhere. And so for me, there's kind of like three main things, and it sounds really simple when I break it down to three things, but I think that there's like three key principles of change management that have to be there and have to be done well for your project to go well. And the first one starts maybe even before you've chosen the technology, and that's, identifying what the change within your organization is going to be, why you need to make that change, and making sure that every person that's involved in the change understands that why. And I don't mean understands the why like from a theoretical level, but understands it well enough to have taken it and internalized it and turned it into their own like what's in it for me statement. Going back to what you said at the beginning, or the question that you asked at the beginning of, how do you manage the change of potentially automating large portions of people's position? And ultimately, if you can get them to understand what's in it for you, is you don't have to do the part of your job that you hate most every day. We get to take that away and you get to do the parts that are interesting to you, or you have less things that you don't like to do all day, every day as a part of your position. But helping them understand what's in it for them, not what's in it for the organization, but how it's going to impact their life and make their life better. you're going to have an automatic advocate, and they are going to have a stake in the success of the project if you can do that correctly. Now, that can be done when you've had a solution chosen and you are working on getting the buy-in for the, as you get going, or it can be done before you've even selected the tool. But that has to be done, and there needs to be an understanding through all levels of the organization of why it's happening and why it's valuable to them. And that why looks different for everybody. And then once you get to the point where you're actually working on implementing a solution, it can't be a black box that's solving the problems for people. Now, do they need to understand how OCR is working and what the algorithms are in the background? Of course not. Do they need to understand what API integrations are happening to pull all of their systems? No. But they do need to understand what that process looks like and how decisions are being made through that process. And as you're going through it, making sure that you're being transparent with stubbed toes or hiccups or repivots because you've understood, you identified through your process, like, ooh, there's actually a way better way that we could be doing this. But there needs to be transparency to that, because I guess I can't ask people on the call to raise their hand with us, but I would imagine most people have been in a scenario where a change has been either just handed to them and they're told, like, okay, this is your new process. And I am like the number one person of like logically being like, why do I have to do this? Because if I don't understand why, then I'm probably not going to. And or there's a lot of organizations that will make a big hubbub on the front end that they're going to do something and disappear into darkness for a year and a half, and then just never have anything happen and never tell anybody about what's happening because a project died, or it's all of a sudden the timeline has extended substantially. And then everybody that you got excited about the change is suddenly discouraged and doesn't believe in your ability to deliver the solution. And whereas if you were just honest and transparent about what that process looks like, they would be accepting of that and still looking forward to what the value will bring. And then on the back end, you can't just bring a solution in and sit it there and hope that people understand what it's done for the organization. You have to clearly communicate what wins you've got, what lessons you learned, what did that look like, what does this mean for the organization. You have to have, highlight stories of people that got benefit out of the project so that you have momentum behind your total digital transformation. And if you don't take advantage of that opportunity to share those stories and scream from the mountaintops about your successes, then again, it's going to be that much harder when you start over again to explain the why and get the buy-in. And so it can be this really like self-perpetuating thing. If you do the change management effectively, suddenly you're going to have so many ideas and so many projects that you don't have the bandwidth to complete them, and you have to put together a roadmap. But if you don't do that the right way, then you don't get to that stage of your transformation.
Yeah, that's great points. And the buy-in seems to be a common theme of what you're advocating, is just getting people involved early on, and understanding. I think you hit another really good point, which is understanding what's in it for me personally, or at the very least my team or my part of the organization. It doesn't always work to have that high level fluffy, we're going to be more efficient as an organization and we're going to provide better customer service. And that's all great, but it's like, what does that mean to me? Like what I'm doing every day. So I think it's a really good point.
Well, and when you hear things like, we're going to be more efficient as an organization and we're going to do this project, that's when you start to get the fear associated with those types of projects, because people will jump to conclusions about what that means for them if you don't help them get to the crux of what you're looking for. Now, again, I hope that most organizations are not just doing these massive automation projects just to, let go of people, because I don't think that that's the right decision. And I think most organizations understand that they need their people. But that doesn't stop the fear of people thinking that automation is going to take their job. And then you look at headlines, and there's headlines all over the place about how AI or intelligent automation are going to get rid of X amount of jobs. But it leaves out the part of the equation of how many jobs can be put in place to help support these technologies, and or how many jobs will just change and not disappear but look different. And that's another one that I could go on for a long time about. But when you look at the last industrial revolution that we had, how many more jobs were created by advancements in technology than were eliminated by people no longer being able to do what they were doing. And as technology advances, your role looks different. You may potentially have to learn new things, but there's still plenty of opportunity for humans to be involved in our work and find work that they're passionate about and continue to do new and exciting things with this technology.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid in the 80s. You remember the 80s, right? Of course.
It wasn't alive. But
sorry, I had to throw that in there.
We can say 90s, right? Because I was there for that.
No, my parents worked at Digital Equipment Corporation in the 80s when I was growing up, and so they were in technology, or they worked for a technology company. But I still remember even back then, like there was all this fear of like computers taking over the world and getting rid of jobs, and that was the same time when a lot of Japanese auto companies were moving into the US and automating a lot of factories and things like that. So there's this whole, I remember this underlying fear, even as a kid, you kind of sensed it, like this fear of like, oh gosh, robots are going to come in and just take over our jobs. So this isn't really anything new, or that fear is nothing new. I think that there's always going to be that underlying fear, especially as technology gets more and more advanced like that.
Well, and the irony of that specific situation is there's a pretty significant shortage of techs that can fix the types of equipment and actual like physical robotics that are in car manufacturing and heavy manufacturing, because something like that goes down, you have to have technical training and you have to understand how to fix that. But there's a shortage of people that can fix that. And, so had we been a little bit more forward thinking and spent time encouraging people to go into those positions instead of always just pushing in a different direction of like heavy academic work, there'd still be lots of opportunity for people to go into the manufacturing space to be a highly specialized technician in those scenarios. And so there's some irony to me that the people that fix the robots that potentially took those jobs are now in a shortage because we didn't spend the time learning those skills. So I think that, you have to be prepared to learn new skills and figure out. Now, that doesn't always mean being a developer. That doesn't always, there's lots of people that feel like they have to figure out how to be whether it's code developer or citizen developer doing configuration. I'm an example of somebody that did not come from a technical background, did not come from, and I have a career in technology now because I took the time to learn some new skills and build that competency. Now, do I understand everything to do with technology? No, but I have a career that's based in it. And there's a lot of opportunity to take soft skills and other things and repurpose them to get more involved in what the future of work looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well said. And I think that's why a lot of skilled labor positions are in such high demand too. In addition to fixing robots or whatever the case may be, there's just a lot of skilled labor shortages throughout the world right now. And I think a lot of that is because of the way just the economy is shifting, and it's just changing the nature of work and changing the types of jobs that we need. Just as we unpack the micro example of the AP clerk and how or the customer service rep, whose job is just evolving. It's still, on one hand, you could say that person's job might go away, but what we're saying, and what I've heard you say, is it's not necessarily going away. It's just changing. It's changing the focus and the purpose of the job. So I think that's a really key point. Now, what about another question? Is maybe a bit more of just your personal background. When you look at your education background, and then you spent the first couple years after being a teacher, you spent a couple years doing training. Mm-hmm. How do you think that skill set, that non-technical skill set, has helped you or complemented, or what has it done for your career at Navient in this space?
So, I think that background is probably the number one reason that I am so passionate about change management. And I think anybody who has been in a middle school classroom, standing in front of them, trying to teach them about something that they don't want to learn about, and having to field the question of, why do I need to know this? And when am I going to use it as an adult? You start to very acutely understand how and why humans need that why. And it's just, or you look at, I've got 2 young daughters. My 2-year-old probably says why 500 times a day. And just looking at our nature as humans and interacting with children in that capacity, you really, really quickly understand that that is such a critical part of getting buy-in for anything in life. Even no, no, you may not do that. Why? Well, I've now got to explain it. And I do that so many times a day. And so I would say that's probably like the biggest in terms of like my approach to our industry and my thought pattern on it, and why I'm so passionate about change is I think that comes from the teaching days and ultimately the training days too. I did my corporate training was working for a fast food franchise and training franchisees who are going to go open up their own business and run, that franchise, all the ins and outs, everything from making a hamburger on the grill to interacting with the customers at the cash register to scheduling their team members and understanding the HR laws and that kind of thing. And that why is so important there too, because ultimately you need to instill the why for them to take that forward and protect that brand. And so that was a really important part of what I did as well through that position, was helping them understand why these things are critical for you to understand and how that fits into your job as a brand ambassador moving forward. And then looking at teaching as, directly related to my position, I didn't go too deep into that, but I'm a sales executive for Naviance, and I manage a number of our accounts, as well as looking at bringing on new customers. And so a lot of my position beyond what I do on social media is having critical conversations, doing presentations, and just being comfortable in, we talked a little bit about it before, but being comfortable in going out and giving presentations and talking in front of people and knowing the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to embarrass myself a little. I did enough of that when I was teaching, enough of spelling words wrong on the board or misspeaking and having to go back and tell the kids this happened, or here, talking through kind of that critical conversation with this very critical audience. And I did see another question come through, but my last piece is I got very, very good at not having all the answers as a teacher. And I think being in an emerging industry, you have to be very comfortable living in the gray and not knowing all of the answers and working with your customers to solve their problems and working through that process. And you get all sorts of varieties of questions and things that come about when you're teaching. And you, as a human, only have so much capacity to understand the ins and outs of things. And you never know what direction your conversations are going to go. So I got very good at saying, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question, but let's figure it out together. And that's something that I do pretty regularly with my customers. And that's been something that I think is really valuable from that career path that I've been able to bring over.
Gotcha. Yeah. It seems like that's a pretty unique skill set. I know, when we're developing our team and looking for, people to join our team, we're looking a lot less at the technical competencies and more at the human and EQ and change management mindset, if you will. So that's super interesting. And that, again, that back to how you and I met on TikTok, and for some reason, TikTok seems to know me well, and you came up in my algorithm or my feed or whatever. And so I thought I'd reach out, but
all these emerging technologies worked to get us to collaborate on our conversations.
Exactly. That's a good point. If it wasn't for AI, I don't know that you and I would have met or come across paths in that way.
Yeah.
So there's another question that popped up, and I'm actually going to maybe preface it or spin it a little bit differently because it's a very difficult question to ask or to answer. So Gabby on Crowdcast, and this will be sort of maybe the last topic we'll cover here today, even though there's a million things I didn't ask you that I wanted to ask you. So we'll have to have you back on again at some point.
There we go.
To cover part 2. But the question is around, the actual question is around how much this type of digital transformation, which would be RPA and or machine learning plus ERP, might cost a small or mid-market company, and how long would it take? But maybe before we get to that answer, maybe I'll back up and ask a pre question leading into that, which is, how does the stuff you've been talking about so far, intelligent automation and RPA, machine learning, AI, we talked a little bit about document management. We didn't dive super deep into that, but you look at these different types of technologies that are they're very specific. They solve very specific types of problems. How does that fit in? How do you usually see that fitting into a broader ERP system? Is it usually, are you guys usually doing this as part of a big, SAP or Oracle or Microsoft implementation, or do they already have an ERP system and now you're coming in to sort of plug the gaps or add additional value with these point solutions, or how does that usually look?
I would say it depends. So some of our customers will be kind of going about a big bang transformation approach. More frequently than not, though, we are coming in with established kind of core solutions, so to speak, whether that's an ERP, because these tools that we're using are so flexible, they sometimes will solve problems to back up accounts payable. And then there will be another implementation. Let's say it's an insurance company and they're doing claims management, integrating with their core claims and underwriting solution. And then they find another use case to support HR. And so that's the beauty of the tools that we use at Naviance, is they're really flexible frameworks that can come in to help support gaps across the organization. And we still want to have a defined use case, and we still have some really strong kind of repeatable use cases that we find, like, we've talked about accounts payable. Every company has bills to pay, and every company has to follow some semblance of the same process to accomplish that. Every company has employees that they have to manage and documentation that support those employees, and things like maternity leaves or performance reviews or those types of things that may be managed within their HRIS system. Typically, they do a really great job of managing the data. And that's kind of what we see across the board as an ERP or HRIS or claims solution, or in healthcare, your medical records system. They all do a very great job of managing data and driving some processes associated with that data. Now, where we find the use case for like our services are typically where there is a process that is dependent on the content, and there's information and content that's going to drive that decision. Usually there's something left to be desired with those core applications managing that process, because like in that accounts payable process, there's an invoice. And if someone has to approve that invoice, they need to look at that invoice to make sure that they want to approve it. Now, some ERPs do a great job of managing, and over the course of the year, there's blending of capabilities and overlap between tools. But we typically, when we're working, we look at what you can do with your existing solutions, and let's keep that core processing and that single point of truth and data where it belongs. And then when you've got gaps to fill, we can be that secondary layer to help fill in those gaps. And the best visual that I've seen of this, and I wish I had it to show on the screen right now, is kind of a puzzle piece that is one base puzzle piece that locks into these different applications and locks into different processes to fill gaps and create a layer that helps you pull everything in your organization together. So, and then, that's kind of document and process management. And then RPA, doesn't necessarily need to be dependent on a document. That can just be a repetitive process and helping enable something above and beyond what your RPA or your ERP can do. And so the best way is just really, when you look at your organization, if you have things like email chains with attachments that are going to 5 or 6 different people to manage a process, you've got macro-enabled spreadsheets that you're using to try and manage processes, old kind of custom built solutions that are kind of clunky, that aren't really doing the job for you to manage some of these side off processes. Those are usually the big red flags that there's an opportunity for us to help you be more efficient. And I have yet to run into an organization, probably even my own team, that aren't using some sort of macro-enabled spreadsheet where there's a better way for us to be doing it. And so there's, the opportunities are so endless in terms of how we could potentially be doing it, but it's making sure that there's a return and a value that comes from automating that process.
Got it. So maybe, I'm trying to unpack Gabby's question a little bit, or get to a answerable version of that question, because it is so broad, and it's a great question. Don't get me wrong, Gabby, but there's so many variables that go into what this costs. But just order of magnitude, help us understand what some of these tools, these point solutions you're talking about, RPA, machine learning, et cetera, what is the cost and the time to implement compared to, say a broader ERP system?
So when you take a look at like RPA, for example, is a relatively low footprint in comparison to like an ERP or even like a document management solution or kind of like full content and process management solution. It tends to be a smaller, like physically smaller implementations as you're getting started. A lot of companies will do like a small proof of concept or one or two processes that they're really focusing in on and then grow over time. And even within RPA, though, the hard part with this, and kind of going back to what you were saying, Eric, is there's so many different vendors and so many different options available. So for small to medium-sized companies, there are the options to go with like Microsoft earlier this year announced that their RPA is going to be a part of their suite. And if you have Microsoft products, you have access to it already. Now, do you have the internal competencies to develop it? Do you have the internal, that it's not free. Let's be real. There's costs associated to it, but the software itself might be available for you within your organization. Now, is that the right tool for every organization? For a small one who's looking to automate small processes and you want to train yourself to do it, that may 100% be the best bet for you. Now, if you're looking at a large scale, high volume, unattended process that is going to offset $100,000 worth of cost savings, you probably want to look at getting something a little bit more robust and bringing in a partner to help you with that. And that's a very different kind of cost structure in comparison to that small one-off like Microsoft type stuff. Same thing with all of the solutions that I offer. Microsoft has kind of a counterbalance to it that might meet your needs. Now, going back to what we were talking about before, my job is to help understand what your needs are and help advise you on if we would be the right fit or if there's other solutions that you should check out. When you start looking at the landscape of technical solutions, for me to be able to answer the question of like what should be your expectation, it really comes down to how critical are the applications that you're automating are, what kind of return you're going to get as an organization of what kind of and also just like your palette of, do we want a solution that we want now and we're aggressively growing in 5 years, we're going to be 3 times the size that we are. Then you probably don't want to bring something in that you're going to have to replace in a year anyhow. So there's a lot of dynamics that go into kind of answering that question, and features and functionality that go into it. But there are, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to find like a great solution to get started with, I would encourage you to start looking into, there's tons of information about Microsoft's offerings from the RPA perspective, as well as some open source tools and that kind of thing that you could certainly have a lower cost entry point if that's what you're looking for.
Interesting. That's super helpful. Well, we've actually exceeded our hour. And like I said, I could easily spend another hour and still probably not get through all the questions I had, plus whatever additional questions the audience has that we didn't get to. But I want to thank you for being here, Emma. This was a super interesting conversation. I learned a lot from chatting with you, and I appreciate how you take some fairly complex topics here and you've sort of simplified them to where even I can understand. And I presume if I can understand it, hopefully the rest of the audience can too.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. How do people get a hold of you? And what's your TikTok or social media handle, just so people can find you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn and TikTok are both just going to be Emma Roloff. So you can, if you're on LinkedIn and you head over to Eric's, I'm sure I will comment so that you can find me easily. And then on TikTok, it is just at Emma Roloff, I believe. See, I'm so new to that game. You are well more experienced than I am, that I'm still kind of like figuring out the waters there. But on LinkedIn, I'm pretty active, do a couple of series of my own. So you'll see Eric on in a couple of weeks with my weekly interview series, as well as some live streams and that type of thing. So I'm easy to get a hold of there, and happy to answer any questions that anybody have in direct message there, or my profile has my work email as well.
Cool. And just for people that are listening that don't see Emma's name, it's spelled EMA, and Roloff is ROLOFF.
That would be helpful. Going back to what we said, my hippie parents named me Emalea and took out that extra M, so that
does harder to find you now. Exactly. Well, great. Well, thanks for being here, Emma, and thanks to the audience for asking great questions, and hope you all found this as informative as I did. Every Friday we do this same time, same place, so you can find us on live stream on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Crowdcast every Friday. And then, like I said, this interview will get polished and edited a bit and put into our Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. So be sure to check both of those out. You can find that all on my YouTube channel if you don't already subscribe. So thanks again all for being here. Have a great Friday and great weekend, and we will chat with you all soon. Take care.